Hello and a very warm welcome from my side. I'm very happy to facilitate this roundtable today. My name is Jana Aljets and I work for Agora Verkehrswende. In English that would be Agora Transport Transformation. We are a Berlin-based think tank and we work towards climate neutrality in the transport sector. We are a non-profit and a non-partisan organization working together with very different key stakeholders from the field of politics, from science, from business, academia, and also from civil society. And our aim is to promote the creation of sustainable and climate-friendly mobility. However, in our view, the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is tied to other very important concerns, such as social justice, freedom, economic efficiency, health, environmental protection, and quality of life. And that is also why we have organized today, thanks to the Mercator Foundation, who has suggested us to do this. We are organizing a roundtable on the issue of climate neutrality as a vehicle for greater social justice. Fortunately, I'm not alone, but we are working here with our great network, and we have invited 3 scientists from Germany who are specifically focusing on this issue, and I'm very happy to talk about social justice in the transport sector today. I would like to start with Matthias Runkel. Matthias Runkel is Head of Transport and Finance Policy at Forum Ökologisch-Soziale Marktwirtschaft. We have talked about this, is kind of intranslatable. His focal points are the design of environmental and climate policy instruments. Most recently, he has worked on international national projects related to the development of strategies for CO2 reduction in the transport sector, the external effects of mobility, the phase-out of harmful subsidies, and sustainable infrastructure financing. He studied economics at Maastricht University and Hong Kong University, so very international. Matthias, to start with you, can you tell us a little bit, what are the different aspects of mobility or transport poverty? What do we talk about when we talk about social dimensions in the transport sector?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak about these issues, because I think it's a very important aspect of the change in transport, to keep this in mind, to the social issues, to all of this. And as you said, I think the mobility poverty is a complex concept. I think it's not something that everybody has heard of, so I want to shed some light on the different dimensions of it, because I think what probably people think of when they think about, for example, energy poverty, they think about affordability, and that's one key dimension of transport poverty, because cars are expensive, mobility is expensive. Even for some people, even public transport is expensive, although it's the cheapest form of transportation usually. But that's only one dimension. But for example, maybe you have heard about the €9 ticket in Germany, where for 3 months everyone was allowed to go everywhere for only 9 months, €9 per month, which was a big experiment, and I think Christoph is going to talk about this in more detail. But this was a huge success because it addressed this specific issue of transport poverty. But there's 3 other dimensions, and 2 of them have to do with infrastructure. So that's one, it's transport poverty, which means there's a lack of, you lack access to transportation infrastructure. So maybe there is no street, or well, usually there's a street, maybe there's no bus, maybe there's no public transportation. Then you're often forced into what scientists call car dependency, which brings you back to affordability, because cars are very expensive. But then the other infrastructure issue is not about the transport infrastructure, but about the accessibility of social infrastructure. So maybe if, for example, in my case in Berlin, I can just walk to the supermarket. So I have a lot of mobility, although I don't need a car. But if you live in a rural area or in a structurally weak area, you maybe have to go really far. And then again, you're often forced into car dependency if there's a lack of infrastructure. So it's a very complex thing to approach, and you need very integrated policy. And last but not least, you have externalities to transportation like noise and pollution, climate, the CO2 emissions, so climate change. And there's like a double inequality, because the people that usually suffer from transport and mobility poverty are the ones that suffer the most from these externalities. So in the next years, when changing transportation has a huge opportunity to address these issues and come up with a better system, but there's of course also a lot of risks to leave people behind, and so it's very important to think about this and plan well ahead.
Yeah, that definitely brings us also to the core issue that we want to discuss here today. I want to introduce to you Karolina Rosinek. She's a research associate in the Mobility Research Unit at the Institute of Human Geography at the University of Frankfurt. And until this March, she worked on the project Social to Mobility, funded by the BMBF, which focused on the topic transport-related social exclusion. And since April, she's part of the follow-up project Social to Mobility 2. The names get more complicated. Social participation and bicycle mobility. Karolina completed her master's degrees in geography at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, focusing on urban and mobility research. Prior to that, she studied geography with a focus on urban and spatial planning and environmental management at the University in Gießen. Karolina, you have done very interesting research focusing on low-income groups, especially parents and elderly. So it's typically a group that we do not have a great lobby. They're not very loud in expressing their interests. So what challenges do they face, the parents and elderly that you were researching on?
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for having me here today. Maybe it's very closely linked to the affordability concept you just talked about. So with a low income, it's quite challenging to be mobile because every transport mode is linked to costs. There's no transport mode that is not linked to costs. So, and this is problematic because you need to be mobile when you want to engage in social life. So we need to be mobile to participate in social life. And with a low income, there's an increased risk of being affected by transport-related social exclusion, which means people with a low income have no or a lower access to certain areas of life, like services, goods, and activities. And in Germany, households with children, and especially single parents, have a high risk of being affected by financial poverty. And older people have a high risk of remaining in poverty because it's getting quite hard to change your financial situation independently when you are getting older. So this is why I conducted 30 interviews with these people, and what they told me about their travel practices is that they all need to save money. They need to save money in their mobility, which means they don't own cars or they drive less with their cars. They stay locally to keep fuel costs low. They don't use public transport often and try to walk and cycle a lot. And this is problematic because we see that they are excluded from our transport system. But it's not only mobility they have to make cutbacks. It's also other areas. For example, clothing, so they buy second-hand clothes instead of going to a shop, or they have to make cutbacks in grocery shopping. They told me that they are not able to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. And they also have to make savings in leisure activities. And this is something I really want to shortly explain. This means that people on low incomes not only are limited in their mobility, they also are limited in their leisure activities. This means that a family with a low income does not go to a zoo or to a cinema because then you have to pay for the transport there and you have to pay the entrance fees. And this is why people are going to a playground or stay at home and watch a movie. And elderly, it's the same. One person told me that instead of going to a cafe and have a coffee there with a friend, she's staying at home and have a coffee at home because she can't not afford it. So with the current transport system, we have a problem that people on low incomes are excluded from the transport system and also excluded from social life because they can't reach certain places that people with higher incomes do reach. And this is, I think, very problematic when we are talking about social justice.
Thank you, Caroline, to give us some insight from your research. Very interesting. And I saw Christoph nodding there. I think he found very similar results as well in his research. I want to introduce him. He spent a large part of his life praising public transport, both as a passenger and as a transport engineer. And his field of expertise can be drawn as like a triangle connecting the subjects of everyday mobility, climate crisis, and social justice. So exactly what we're talking about today. His PhD focuses on the financial accessibility of public transport for low-income urbanites. And he has recently interviewed, in a qualitative manner, 30 people regarding the €9 ticket that was available this summer in Germany. Christoph, what are your main findings? Because you talked specifically to low-income groups who were using this €9 ticket, expressing much more modes of mobility. What are your main findings? What can you tell us about this?
I can't even put into words the freedom that this ticket gave me. Finally, I'm able to visit my grandchildren more often. I've squeezed each and every appointment into these 3 months. Yes, of course, I'm talking about the €9 ticket, which I'm sure many of us have used when it was valid in summer. It basically enabled any of us to roam the whole of Germany for a monthly fare of €9, which is incredibly small. Yeah, the €9 ticket really came out of the blue. I picked up the phone, called HVV, which is our local transport association, and asked them, do you want to do some research with me? Well, they wanted to. And so a few grad students of mine and I were able to conduct an in-depth interview survey among 30 persons who live on a very low income. Turns out they are, if you want so, role models when it comes to transportation behavior. As Caro already said, they own very few cars, they travel very short distances, and their carbon footprint is remarkably small. They do so, however, not by choice. It is the mere poverty that makes them cut back on their daily needs. I therefore propose using decarbonization that we need anyway to also foster social equity. We can easily do so by cutting back on fossil fuel emissions, on fossil fuel subsidies, sorry. For instance, we have what we call the Dieselprivileg in Germany, whereby diesel is not taxed equally to petrol. So if you drive a diesel car, you pay less taxes. The Dieselprivileg and other subsidies amount to more than 30 billion euros each year in the German transport sector alone. And these subsidies are very unfair. They benefit rich households much more than they benefit low-income households, which, when we turn this upside down, means we have a very strong lever to bring together decarbonization and social equity. When we talk about this 30 billion euros, for instance, we could easily fund a €9 ticket for 3 years in a row. A famous colleague of mine once wrote, "The car is the enemy of social solidarity as much as public transport is its friend." When we take away money from fossil fuel subsidies and spend it on affordable transport, we choose social solidarity. We achieve 2 things. First, we achieve a what we call modal shift. The more expensive the car gets, the more people opt for public transport. Second, we guarantee a certain level of public transport service for everyone, which above all benefits those on a tight budget. By doing so, we not only stop fueling the climate crisis, we also offer a little bit of freedom for those who have to decide between a meal and a metro ticket. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all 3 of you. I wanted to make it a little bit clearer, because usually when we talk about transport transformation, we think about the ecological transformation that is necessary. So we think about how can we achieve climate neutrality in the transport sector, which is a huge challenge, because thinking about that 20% of our global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the transport sector, and from them it's more than 90%, it's from the car, from the street transport sector. So usually when we talk about this ecological transformation, the idea is that transport needs to be more expensive. It has to cost more so that people will acknowledge the worth of it and maybe travel less. Now, hearing from your experience and hearing also the different dimensions of exclusion when it comes to transport sector, what do you say about the argument that mobility needs to stay affordable for everyone? I don't know, you...
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I think I think that's the big opportunity in the transition of the transport sector, to get into a system which is much cheaper, much more affordable, and more ecological, just by shifting from the car-dependent system to a more system that's relies more on public transportation. For all the reasons that we heard before, it's more justice. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think. And on the other hand, because the other strategy for the transport sector is electrification of cars, and I think this there are also a lot of opportunities, but this has a lot of risks, because it will maybe be more expensive, at least it will be very expensive to make this transition for a lot of households, to buy a new car. So imagine the year 2035, we have a high CO2 price because we need it for the transition, and half of the population, and it's high-income households, already switched to electric cars, and all the other half is still stuck with diesel and petrol cars. So they need alternatives. We also need instruments to make electric vehicles more affordable. But yeah, I think it's obvious that there will be a lot of risks. And on the other hand, with public transportation, you have all these opportunities, and also from an economic point of view, it's the much more efficient and cost-saving system. So that's really, this modal shift is really one central part for a just transition.
You want to add something, or?
I would like to correct a tiny phrase. You asked me, or you asked us, whether we want to mobility to stay affordable. First of all, we need mobility to become affordable to each of us. More than once I've heard the sentence, "Oh, it's already the end of the month." So usually I would decide whether I buy a meal or a metro ticket. I decide whether I buy a meal or a metro ticket. That's a statement in itself.
Yeah, maybe also the fact that when we don't have an affordable transport system, that a lot of other systems will not work out anymore. Because look at the German health system. We can visit a doctor and we don't have to pay money for that. But what about the public transport ticket to get to the doctor? So there were studies on the 9-euro ticket, like you did, and the results are that people said, wow, now I could go and see the doctor because I could afford the public transport ticket to see the dentists. So when we don't have an affordable transport system, I think also the social systems will collapse.
I think your examples show very well as well that how much mobility is actually the condition to be a social participant of the society in many aspects. Let's talk a little bit about instruments, because we're not the first ones to talk about this, fortunately. However, I guess the solutions are still debated. Let's talk about the instrument of putting a price on fossil fuels. For example, carbon tax, you have mentioned that before, or an emission trading scheme. Usually it's portrayed as a very efficient tool to reduce the emissions in the transport sector. Others, though, argue that these market instruments specifically disadvantage low-income groups who cannot invest in electric cars or don't own a car anyways. What do you say about instruments on like carbon pricing?
I guess I start.
Yeah, you're the economist in the group, so you can start. But
so as an economist, I'm very much in favor of this instrument. So it has to be central within a broader policy mix. And I think what you see right now in the energy crisis is that high prices are really efficient at making households and industry. I think we always talk about households, but in the case of CO2 pricing, it's a lot about companies and industry, and it's very efficient to make them save them wherever they can. So in that way, it's an efficient and good instrument. But of course, it needs to be there need to be additional measures to take care of the social problems that it has, and it obviously has problems because, as I said before, there's sort of people that are car dependent. They need the car because there's not the infrastructure, so maybe they cannot even benefit from the €9 ticket because there's no bus in the area, so they will be stuck with their car. There's a lot of people with jobs that are still poor because they need their car to go to their job, then they earn low income and they spend this on their car, so they are stuck in this situation, and the CO2 price will make this worse for a lot of people. So yeah, we need a good instrument to take the revenue and distribute it fairly across all households. And that's just one piece of the puzzle, because you need a lot of different things as well, but I think that has to be a central part of the policy mix.
Thank you. And you mentioned the car dependency. I would like to stress this a little bit more, because our current status quo shows a very car-centric traffic system, and this is not only true for Germany, it's probably true for most of the countries. With many subsidies and policies, sometimes not even that visible, that support and reinforce the system, talking about free parking, or talking about public road financings, or the fuel discount that we had this summer. How do we overcome this widespread car dependency? What are good instruments besides also subsidies in an intelligent manner?
I can start, maybe. So I think this is a very complex thing, because this car dependency is really deeply rooted in our society, and our built environment is built for cars, not for people. That's like it is. But I think we all need to focus on stopping the substitution of the car. So this means that we need to invest and claim for environmental friendly transport modes to be more in the focus of politics and planning. So this is something we really need to do. And I think it's also something that we all can change, maybe, is that we should start thinking about our, start to see clearly how dependent we are on cars. Because I don't know if somebody in the audience ever thought about, why do our children have to play with toys that are cars in their rooms? Or why is it normal that a person whose birthday is 16, 17, 18, it's normal that they will receive money for the driver's license. So it's such a normal thing that everything is centered off car driving, that I think a big step would be to start being critical about that and asking questions, and then there's a lot of other things to do, but I think this is something that everybody can do.
I would start rather at the policy level than at the individual level. And my first wish would be to stop jeopardizing our own initiatives. For instance, we had what we called Klimakabinett in 2019. This was a huge governmental program to foster climate mitigation. And in the transport sector, the government adopted a carbon tax. I think you mentioned it, Matthias, that the carbon price increases until 2025. But at the same time, they adopted a law that you get a higher subsidy when you commute long distances. So all people who commute between Frankfurt and Berlin, which is a rather long distance for commuting, they get more money back when they declare their taxes. And in the end, this policy measure benefited those people who are well off anyway, and not those who we needed to target when it comes to distributional justice.
Yeah, maybe another thing that I would like to add is that what economists like to call push and pull measures. So you need to put pressure on the cars and make it more costly, and at the same time strengthen the alternatives. But I think it's a very critical balance, because you always have to keep in mind that there's such a thing as a transport poverty, and a lot of people really, you easily exclude people from social life. And but I think you can usually find a balance and mix instruments like carbon pricing and redistributing revenue, or making commuter tax allowances, just make them different than they are now, because they benefit high income households with long distances, and you can easily redo the instrument, and you just have to look into other countries, because it's usually the best thing you can do. Look what have other countries, what have they done, and you find a lot of good examples for all these instruments, even in Europe. But I think the important thing is to keep this thing, transport poverty, which I think a lot of people haven't even thought about, in mind while designing all the instruments and the policies that you are doing.
Picking up also the idea of push and pull measures that we need, I would like to talk a little bit more about the role of public transport, because it's been years that, at least in Germany, we haven't been discussing so much about public transport. In having introduced the €9 ticket, and everybody was able to move around. And there were a lot of people actually saying before we had this that public transport is dead, nobody wants to use this anymore, we have to think about new modes of mobility. Now we're talking again about public transport and about the need of having more of it. Do you think the public transport is the answer for a just mobility system? Is it the transport vehicle for everybody? What do you say about the debates that are ongoing right now?
It can be part of the answer if we take it seriously. As we've seen, the very low price of the €9 ticket really made demand skyrocket. So there's been an ongoing debate within the last 15 years. One union of the experts said, you cannot offer public transport for a low price because it's the service level that's important. The others said, no, it's the price. And now we've had this very, very good experiment for 3 months, and we see once we take down the price to a very low level, we induce very, very much public transport demand. But at the same time, we have to make the car more costly. What did the government adopt at the same time as the €9 ticket? They adopted the Tankrabatt, which lowered energy tax for fuel for these 3 months, which effectively went into the profits of fossil fuel companies. So if we took it seriously, we would adopt a measure like a €9 ticket, or as the Deutschland ticket that is planned for next year now for €49 a month, right? A month. And we wouldn't adopt a similar measure for fossil fuels.
Maybe just to add something on that, I think it's not only like the low price, but it's also we need more investment in the public transport system. Because when we really want to make public transport attractive for everybody, then that's not enough what we have now. So we need more investments. And I think it's a combination also between investments in public transport system and also in cycling infrastructure. And because we also need people for shorter distances to cycle and to walk when they are able to do that. And this means, I think, not only walkable streets, like some people call it. I think we need streets that invite people to walk. This means we need green spaces, we need space that people can go side by side on a footpath. Or we need benches, because older people or people with disabilities or children need to rest when they walk for distances. So I think this is something that I want to add to this, not only public transport that's affordable for everybody, but also more investment in economical friendly infrastructure.
because you actually already kind of answered my next question, which I will pose anyways. But after that, I would also like to open the round for your questions and comments. So just after that, make yourself ready, because we would love to hear from your side as well. My question would be like, you kind of answered a little bit of it, like how do we create accessibility and mobility for all people, and taking into account as well special needs, be it people living in rural areas with so far very little public transport, being it disabled people, children, elderly, low-income groups. So we have lots of groups who are usually not so visible when we talk about a transport transformation, and usually do not have the loudest voices in expressing their needs. So how do we take this into account? Also, yeah, to create a better system for these groups as well.
Yeah, I've had the big question, and I think you have to address it at almost every policy level, in all areas, in all policy areas. Like when you think about social policy, you have to think about these issues. If you think about transport policy, you have to think about. If you think about, so you always have to have an integrated approach to address these things, not all at once, but at different levels. That's a very vague question, but maybe you want to add more specifics to that.
Maybe a very practical thing everybody can do is when you plan or make projects in the transport sector and you are not sure if this project is for everybody, just ask the people. They are out there. So if we can't guarantee now that there's more diversity in the whole planning process, then we can go and ask these people. There are people with disabilities, children, all the people, all the invisible or vulnerable groups, they are there, and we just have to hear what they are saying, because they know best what they need and what they don't need. And then, and that's very important, not only hearing what they say and believing them, that's important. And then have a second look, I think, on projects or a plan, and then change maybe some details.
That was actually a very interesting aspect of our current research. We've conducted interviews with low-income people in the HVV area, many of which were very hard to reach. It's not easy to, well, go outside and ask like, oh yeah, you look like a low-income person. Would you have time for a few questions? First, many of them were very cautious and they wouldn't trust us that much. But the more we asked them, the more they said, oh yeah, it's so important that finally someone hears my story, and great that you're here, and great that you can make it better. Where we had to say, unfortunately, we are not enrolled by HVV, we're just a research team by Technical University of Hamburg, and we can make recommendations, but your interview will probably not change the 9-Euro ticket to become valid forever. But the fact that they were heard was very, very important to our interviewees.
Yeah. I think also that's actually a lesson not only on transport behavior, but also on democracy and participation in general, right? Do I have any comments or questions from the audience? I have difficulty seeing your faces very well because the lights are so light. I see a question there. There's a person coming with a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this really, really interesting discussion. I would have one question regarding the 15 minutes concept, like the 15-minute city concept, so I can get it out. And what do you think about that, and how you would implement it, of course, in the context of living in the city, because we have to differentiate to rural areas, of course.
Yeah, maybe I can start a little more in general, because that's like the third dimension of transport poverty, of mobility poverty that I talked about in the beginning. So the accessibility. So if you make cities more dense and make it, you also have to change mobility demand. So I don't have to travel long distances if everything is close by, and we build a lot of cities, and that's hard to reverse, but in the past we built cities that were built around cars, and where it's, you have a car, so you can go everywhere. It's not a problem. And now we have to come back to city planning where you think about this differently and think how can we bring back closer together, and that will take a lot of time, but I think that's one part of the puzzle as well in the more medium and long term. But I guess you have ideas.
Maybe just one example, what's then important when you have a look on low-income groups. For example, when there is a grocery shop, that's maybe not enough. There has to be a discounter or food bank when you're on a low income, because then you also have to go somewhere else. And then a 15-minute city with one shop it's not not a solution for people on low incomes. And I think this is also something that we have to keep in mind when we are talking about such concepts. Yeah.
For my PhD, I've analyzed the accessibility of food banks, but not with a time scheme, but with a fare scheme. So I would ask, how much would you need to pay to access the next food bank? And in Hamburg, there was 21% of the population that couldn't access the next food bank unless they paid more than €3 per trip. From a planning theory perspective, that sounds okay. There's a rule of thumb that says, okay, once you address 80% of the population, you have a decent public transport service. However, if you are part of the 21%, that is not of need for you in any regard, because then you're screwed.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? I see another one there. Sorry, I'm always...
Thank you. I was wondering, when we look at public transport and compare it to cars, we usually talk about fossil fuel powered cars. And I think while we're phasing out fossil fuels, I think it becomes more or less obvious that public transport is the more attractive option and will also be seen as such. But what if we say focus more on electric cars or hydrogen-driven cars? Where does that put the attractivity of public transport, and what chances does it stand, and which other challenges might it be confronted? Because, say, electric cars will have more of a lobby from more different fractions as opposed to the fossil fuel-powered car. So, yeah, what's...
Maybe I start with an example from my interviews I did with low-income households with children and elderly. Not everybody on a low income in Germany has a driver's license. So that's quite expensive to get one. So the problem of accessibility when you have electric cars, it's also that there's no access for everybody. So this is the first hurdle for maybe another use of cars. And I also think that electric cars don't solve every problem we have with cars when you think about places in cities. So I think it's not a good solution to focus only on changing like the fossil fuel cars into electric cars, and that's why I think that the public transport is a key factor if you want to change something. But maybe you both want to add something.
Maybe back up the car a little bit, because it's we will need it definitely, so that the transition to electric cars or other alternative technologies is a necessity, and it will be. I mean, cars are still freedom for a lot of people, and I think it's for different people that we talked about today. It's for the upper and middle incomes, and for them it's a solution, and it's a viable solution, and that we need to have it. But as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of risks then between the transition and the social aspects of transport, while there are much more opportunities for public transportation. But it's still something that has to happen, and that's not. We cannot talk it away, I guess.
And if I may, I've seen you. If I may take the freedom to also add, a personal anecdote, because we also need to electrify the buses, right, and the public transport that isn't yet. And I don't know if you ever rode a bike behind a public bus. And imagine now it's electric. It's so much better. Just for the direct health impact. So we also need to electrify that. I've seen another question there, and then we have time for that. So that would be great if a microphone could be handed over to that person. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're focusing here in this session on the sort of level of climate injustice and social transport poverty, where a €9 ticket is a choice to make, but it's an accessible choice. What if we go to the global south, where the problem is much greater, and we talk about emerging industrialized economies where cities are being built that are growing very, very, very fast, but are not necessarily being planned along these lines, in the right lines. For you, if you had to pitch from your learning, you have amazing research here from a very developed economy, one of the strongest in the world. So what would you tell them about urban planning, about social transport? What would your pitch be, your one point that would make them do this well and invest the right way?
Maybe one short answer is skip the car. It's like the horse. It's one part of technological history, and skip it and right to the next best choice. I mean, it can be a part of the transport mix, but make it a rather minor one, because especially the US, but Germany as well, they build everything around the car, and it's very hard to get out of this again, because you have to take it away from people, and that hurts. I mean, taking away parking spots is like the hardest thing to do, and it's very, very important.
You drew a very strong picture in my mind. There's an urban highway, I think it's somewhere in Egypt, just being built, and they just put it in front of the balconies of the residents there. It's like 10 or 12 meters high, and the ground floor just doesn't get any more light because there's a new highway being built right in front of their house. This is incredible. I would argue along the lines of costs, just narrowing down how much costs a society actually has to bring up to fund a car-based transport system. Only looking at the costs per car, there was a very interesting study by TU Dresden that summed up the costs to 5,000 to 6,000 euros per year per vehicle in the EU. That is subsidized by all of us by counting together the money you need to build a street, maintain a street, the money for the emergency service that comes when you have an accident, the long-term health costs by pollution, and so on, the climate costs. And if I were in this situation that I had to pitch to a governor of an emerging country, yeah, I would say it's stupidly expensive. Please stop it.
Yeah, maybe just because I pretty much appreciate what you said, and I think there's good examples from cities worldwide, or in Europe, that made the transition to bicycle-friendly cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and they did this out of because they lacked money, and they said, okay, it's cheaper to build bike lanes than car lanes, and it's just the cheaper transport system.
I have time for one more question. Yeah, you fine, okay. So that lady over there, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm from South Africa, so it follows on talking about the global south. And I found your topics amazingly interesting. They're not easily transposable to a South African context because of spatial injustice, where economic opportunities are far away from where people who need economic opportunities live. And what they've done in Cape Town, where I live, is they're trying to create economic corridors closer to where people live, rather than solving the transport problem. And I'm just wondering the extent to which brilliant research, like the research that you've done, is transposable to a context like South Africa with its history of spatial injustice through apartheid. Is there stuff to be gleaned from this kind of research that can be transposed to that situation?
I've actually been to South Africa, and that's where I really realized this dimension of transport for poverty, this accessibility, when you just don't have access, when everything is just so far away. I mean, it's really at the extreme, but you can, if you take this view and bring it back to Germany, you still see these things here as well on a much smaller scale. But yeah, I found that really impressive when I went there. Yeah, that's my personal anecdote. But yeah, I think it's very hard to find a solution for this because, yeah, I think infrastructure and especially transport infrastructure also a result of power. It's built around power. It's built around economic power also, because most streets and public transport, it goes along the ways where people go to work. That's what it's built for. It's not built for the mother visiting the grandmother and taking for the care work. Usually it's way more difficult transport ways. It's way across the city, but transport lines, public transport lines, they usually go just where people have to go to work. And yeah, but changing this, of course, it's very difficult, but we have to do it.
Also, may I add something? I don't know whether you read the book.
Sorry, wait for the microphone so also the live stream viewers can. Yeah, please.
Essentially, as you know, when you're a gender justice activist, mobility is something that is also far away from women, especially. And what I really loved in this book, it's called Invisible Women, was how important public toilets in the public transportations are for women with kids and elderly people, because this is sometimes the only way they could actually, do their thing. And so I think when it comes to planning cities and public transportation, it is crucial to actually have access to data that represent the entire sort of, landscape of people living in the country, and not only let somebody who is maybe white, maybe male, plan something that he will never ever use. Anyways, yeah.
Thank you for mentioning this book. Carolina Criado Perez is the
love this
author,
book.
is very highly recommended.
Really good.
Lots of examples from the transport sector, by the way. We need to close the session already, so I would like to have a few closing remarks, because we've seen that we need to go down with global gas emissions in the transport sector, but equally important is to achieve more social justice when it comes to mobility possibilities of people. So one by one, maybe, what is, in your view, the most important political recommendation that you could make, considering the question of how do we achieve greater social justice in the transport sector? Maybe we start with Christoph, Carolina, and then Matthias, the other way around than before.
From January on, we will probably have the 49 euros ticket, the Deutschland ticket, which is a big step towards climate transition, but it's not enough for the people I've talked with. So Hamburg, for instance, does a good job now subsidizing these 49 euros even more, so that these people have to pay around 25 euros a month, which is an okay price.
Maybe I would like to add from my research that we don't need only measures in the transport sector, like making affordable public transport, more cycle lanes, walkable and inviting streets, but we also need measures in the social sector, let's say, because I know from my interviews that people with a stable social network can help each other, like giving lifts to each other. They can go to a grocery store for somebody. So I think when we really want to counter climate crisis and make social and environmental justice, we need to invest in both, in transport measures and in social projects and social measures.
Yeah, I think it's very hard because there's so many things you have to do, but I would still, despite everything we said today, say the carbon price needs to be not at the center, but it's more like maybe like a measurement stick to see where you are. If the CO2 price is going too high, you see you're doing not enough, and you have to invest in public transportation or anything. But for the efficiency of the transition, and we really need to make it as cheap as possible. We still need this instrument.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Christoph, Carolina, and Matthias for being here and sharing insights of your research. I want to thank the organizers of Falling Walls Summit as well, who've done a great job, and also to Mercator Foundation, who suggested us to speak here. And just want to finish with a rephrased quote that I just remembered seeing on Twitter. A symbol of a rich country is when the people with the highest income use the public transport. I wish you a wonderful conference. We're here for any more questions, and yeah, have a good conference. Thank you.